Jai Hind. I'm Cadet Vedika KN, representing Karnataka and Goa Directorate, 6 Karnataka Air Squadron NCC Mangalore, NCC Air Wing Flight A. In this session, I'm going to discuss about the topic Airmanship. So let's begin the presentation. Airmanship. What is airmanship? Airmanship is a study of rules and regulation which must be followed both on the ground and in air to ensure safety and proper discipline in flying. It thus includes all air traffic control procedures and other actions laid down to deal with any type of aircraft emergencies and other contingencies. Why is airmanship important for aviators? Airmanship helps to inculcate the sense of discipline amongst pilots and other crew members. It helps the pilot to know the standard procedures. It helps the pilot to know procedure to be followed in emergency situations. Finally, airmanship, when studied in correct sense, promotes flight safety and prevents aircraft accidents. So, some of the terms in airmanship are aerodrome, a defined area on land or water, including any buildings, installations, and equipment intended to be used either wholly or in part for the arrival, departure, and movement of the aircraft. So in this below picture, it is a whole aerodrome. We can see that. Airfield. The airfield refers to an area of land used for takeoff and landing of aircraft and excludes building and installations. Airport. The word airport is mainly used for civil flying establishments which handle international air traffic and therefore have a custom house, other travel amenities. Aircraft classification number. The ACN is a number expressing the relative effect of an aircraft load on a pavement for specified subgrade strength. Air report. It is a report passed during the course of flight in conformity with the requirements for position, operation, or meteorological reporting in the AIREP forms. Aerodrome reference point. It is the designated geographical location of an aerodrome, normally taken as the geometrical center of the runways, or runway in the case of single runway aerodrome. The ARP is defined in degrees, minutes, and seconds of latitude and longitude. Aerodrome traffic zone. The airspace extending from an aerodrome to a height of 20,000 feet above the level of the aerodrome and within the distance of 1.5 nautical mile of its boundaries, except any part of that airspace which is within the aerodrome traffic zone of another aerodrome which is notified as being the controlling aerodrome is called the aerodrome traffic zone. Air Defense Identification Zone. Airspace of defined dimensions within which the ready identification, location, and air control of aircraft is required. No flight of aircraft, that is civil or military, Indian or foreign, originating within the ADIZ defined under Para 1 above and those penetrating into these ADIZ are permitted without air defense clearance, except the local flights conducted within the airspace of 5 nautical miles radius centered at ARP and vertical limits of 1000 feet AGL of an aerodrome. Aircraft when operating to, through or within the ADIZ shall obtain air defense clearance before takeoff through the ATC concerned. Air routes. The navigable airspace between 2 points identified to the extent necessary for the application of flight loads. Here we can see the air routes around Bangalore. Air Traffic Advisory Service. Service provided to ensure separation insofar as possible between the aircraft which are operating on an IFR flight plan outside control areas but within advisory routes or advisory areas. Air Traffic Control Center, an organization established to provide air traffic control within the control area, flight information service within the flight information region, alerting service for search and rescue within its flight information region. Air Traffic Control Clearance. It gives authorization for an aircraft to proceed under conditions specified by an air traffic control unit. Aerodrome Traffic Control Service, a service provided for the purpose of preventing collisions between aircraft in air and on the maneuvering area between aircraft and obstructions, expediting and maintaining an orderly flow of traffic. Aircraft control services are provided by licensed air traffic controllers. The call sign suffixes tower, approach, ground, director, zone, and radar are used as appropriate. Airway, a control area or portion thereof established in the form of corridor equipped with radio navigation aid. Holding point, a point specifically located, identified by visual or other means in the vicinity of which the position of an aircraft in flight is maintained in accordance with the air traffic control instructions. Heading. Heading is the direction in which the longitudinal axis of aircraft is pointed, usually expressed in degrees from north. Height, the vertical distance of a level, a point, or an object considered as a point, measured from a specific datum. Altitude, the vertical distance of a level, a point, or an object considered as a point measured from a mean sea level. Elevation, the vertical position of a point or a level above or on or affixed to the surface of the earth measured from the mean sea level. Flight level, it is a surface of constant atmospheric pressure which is related to a specific pressure datum of 1013.2 MB and is separated from other such surfaces by specific pressure intervals. Prohibited area, airspace of defined dimensions about the land areas of territorial waters of a state within which the flight of aircraft is prohibited. Danger area, an airspace of defined dimensions within which activities dangerous to the flight on the ground maneuvering of aircraft may exist as specified times. Restricted area, an airspace of defined dimensions above the land areas of or territorial waters of the state within which the flight of aircraft is restricted in accordance with specified conditions. Load classification number. The bearing strength of a pavement or runway is defined by a number. This is associated with an indication of the characteristics and type of construction of the pavement. Alerting service, a service provided to notify appropriate organizations regarding aircraft in need of search and rescue aid and assist such organizations as required. Alternate aerodrome, an aerodrome specified in the flight plan to which a flight may proceed when it becomes inadvisable to land at the aerodrome of intended landing. Distress message, emergency message to be used when an aircraft is threatened by serious or imminent danger and the crew is in need of immediate assistance. Ceiling, the height above the ground or water of the base of lowest layer of cloud below 6,000 meters covering more than half the sky. Estimated time of arrival. For IFR flights, the time at which it is estimated that an aircraft will arrive over a designed point defined by reference to navigation aids from which it is intended that an instrument approach procedure will be commenced, or if no navigation aid is associated with the aerodrome, the time at which the aircraft will arrive overhead. For VFR flights, it is the time at which the estimated that the aircraft will arrive over the aerodrome. Flight plan, specified information provided to air traffic service units relative to the intended flight or portion of a flight of an aircraft. Visibility. So what is visibility? It is a degree of transparency of atmosphere, or we can say It is the measure of maximum distance to which a person with normal vision can see an object and recognize it. Types of visibility. There are three types of visibility affecting aviation. They are horizontal visibility, vertical visibility, and slant visibility. Causes of poor visibility: dust haze, dust raising winds, dust storm, smoke haze, moist haze, mist, fog, smog. These are all which causes poor visibility. So here are some of the images of the causes of poor visibility. So next is airfield layout. In this picture we can see the airbase layout from the top. Some terms in airfield layout. Movement areas are that part of an airfield intended for surface movement of the aircraft. These are paved areas and include runways, taxiways, dispersal areas, and aprons. Flight strip. It is the rectangular portion of an airfield containing the runway and paved overruns along with the shoulders and clear zones. Shoulders. Shoulders are the areas immediately adjacent to the edges of the runway, taxiways, overruns, and SGAs prepared for accidental or emergency use in the event of an aircraft running off the paved surface. Cleared zones. These are those areas of the flight strip adjacent to the shoulders which, for safety of an aircraft operations, should be leveled and be free of obstructions as far as possible. Overrun areas. A defined rectangular area on ground at the end of the runway in the direction of takeoff, prepared as a suitable area in which an aircraft can be stopped in case of abandoned takeoff or during a landing emergency. Aerodrome markings. Aerodrome markings consist of signs on surface of movement areas to convey aeronautical information. Aerodrome ground markings shall consist of the following markings. They are runway markings, taxiway markings, unserviceability markings. Runway markings. Runway markings shall consist of the following: runway designation markings, runway centerline marking, runway threshold marking, runway touchdown zone markings, runway side strip markings. All markings on runway shall be painted white except unserviceability marking, which are painted orange. So in this picture below we can see all these markings. Runway designation markings. Runway designation markings shall be provided on all instrument and non-instrument runways. Runway designation marking shall consist of 2-digit number on parallel runways shall be supplemented by a letter. Runway designation markings shall be located at the beginning of the runway after the threshold markings. So this is the runway identification marking. Runway threshold markings. Runway threshold markings shall be provided on all paved instrument and non-instrument runways. So the location of the runway threshold markings. The longitudinal stripes of the threshold markings shall commence 6 meter from the runway threshold. Characteristics. The markings shall consist of a series of longitudinal strips of uniform dimensions symmetrically placed on both the sides of the runway center line and extending laterally to 1.5 meter from the edge of the runway. The spacing between the stripes shall be equal to the width of the stripes except that a double spacing shall be provided between the stripes nearest to the center line. The dimension of stripes will be 30 meter long and 2.1 meter wide. From the number of strips shall be 10. So these are the runway threshold markings. Runway centerline markings. Location. Runway centerline marking shall be provided on all instrument and non-instrument runways. Runway center markings shall consist of a series of broken longitudinal lines along the runway center line and extending along the whole length of the runway between two runway designation markings, except when interrupted in compliance with rules. The dimensions of longitudinal lines shall be 30 m long and 0.9 m wide, spaced with the gap of 15 m. Runway side strip markings. Location. Side strip markings shall be provided on all paved runways. These markings shall consist of two lines extending the whole length of the runway parallel to the equidistance from the runway center line. These are all continuous lines of 0.9 m width. The distance between two lines shall be 42 m. Touchdown zone markings. Touchdown zone markings shall be provided on all instrument runways. These shall be longitudinal strips marked symmetrically on both the sides of the runway center line. Dimensions of touchdown zone markings shall be 22.5 m long and 1.8 m wide with a gap of 0.9 m between subsequent strips. Gap between two innermost strips shall be 15 m. Touchdown markings shall be located over the first 600 m of instrument runways at longitudinal spacing of 150 m. Here we can see the touchdown zone markings extending 150 meters parallel to the runway. Taxiway markings. Taxiway markings shall consist of the following: taxiway centerline markings, runway holding position markings. Taxiway centerline marking. These markings shall be single unbroken lines of 0.15 m wide along the center line of taxiway. These markings shall be painted white or yellow. This line shall terminate whether taxiway meets runway and shall not be continued so as to cut across the runway. On a straight section of a taxiway, the markings shall be located along the taxiway center line. On a taxiway curve, the markings shall continue from the straight portion of taxiway at a constant distance from the outside edge of the curve. Runway holding markings. These markings shall consist of four white or yellow lines of 0.15 m width, each with spacing of 0.15 m. These markings shall be painted white for entire width of taxiway at right angle to its center line. The location of runway holding position markings shall be 45 m from the nearest edge of the runway. Unserviceability markings. In case of runway and taxi track, unserviceability marking shall be displayed at each end of the unserviceable portion, and unserviceability markings shall be displayed on a runway or a taxi track or portion thereof which is permanently closed to the use of all aircraft. On a closed runway, markings shall be placed at interval of 300 m. On a taxiway, a closed marking shall be placed at each end of the taxiway or portion thereof closed. Unserviceable portions of movement areas other than runway and taxi track are to be delineated by boundary markings with red flag, and where appropriate, an unserviceability marking should be placed near the center of unserviceable area. Here in the image we can see how unserviceable areas are marked with large yellow X. Aerodrome lighting. There are several types of approach and airfield lighting in use in the service. All permanent installations are normally on the mains electricity supply, but also have some alternative arrangements for the use in the event of power failure. Aerodrome lighting is considered under two headings. There are approach lighting and airfield lightings. Approach lighting. This is to assist the pilots to make an approach for landing in poor visibility or at night. Airfield lightings. Modern installation consists of raised high-intensity white lights along each side of the runway beamed towards the landing aircraft. At the beginning of the runway, called threshold, is a bar of green lights going across the full width of the runway. In this picture, we can see how an aerodrome lighting looks. So this is the approach lighting system, and this is the runway end identifier light, and this is the runway threshold light. In this session, we discussed about what is airmanship and why it is important for aviators, and different terms in airmanship, what is visibility and causes of poor visibility, what is airfield layout and different parts of airfield layout. We also discussed about runway markings, taxiway markings, and unserviceability markings, aerodrome lighting, that is approach lighting, and airfield lighting. Here is the end of the presentation. Thank you.